I have to thank you very much for that introduction. You know, you get introduced a lot, and most people just read your website, which is a collection of your own lives and stories. So that was just absolutely lovely. Thank you. It's a little daunting to follow that. It is such a pleasure. Oh, thank you. I don't know how you did that cosmic thing. Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here in Atlantic Canada. It just amazes me to say it. You know, when you're in the west side, it takes forever to get here, and it's so worth it. Just the kindness from the organizing committee, the invitations, the start of this, the morning conversation with new friends. There's something pretty special about our country, but there's something pretty special about Atlantic Canada in terms of its welcome and its warmth and its rain. When you come from Kelowna, I should be taking some of this rain back to our desert. This morning, I want to tell a story. I want to tell actually 3 stories and just invite you into a conversation. I think this talk this morning for me means a lot. When Ann Sherman invited me here back in, I guess it was the spring, everything looked different and things were going to be different. And I think one of the things that tells us is change is inevitable. Creativity is inevitable, and how one deals with things is probably the most important bit in life. This talk also is meaningful to me because I'm going to actually retire in June, and I think this is my last formal keynote officially. So it gave me a lot of pause about if you're going to captivate or try to captivate people for a period of time, what are you going to say that's worth listening to? And that's always a daunting challenge. So let's get started. I chose this being creative or becoming creative because, you know, I think a lot of us think of creativity like naturally curly hair. You either have it or you don't. I certainly don't. So, but I do think you can become creative. And I think one of the biggest gifts we can give all of ourselves as well as children is the gift of design thinking, of a process by which one can become something. You don't just wake up more gifted. You don't just wake up with the ability to play the beautiful harp. That takes practice, and it takes becoming. And I think that's what I want to talk about this morning. It's lovely to follow the words of people who said all the things you'd like to say, and I'm going to somehow do this whole thing without citing Sir Kenneth once, so thank you for putting that on the table. But I think there's a huge misconception that being creative has to do only with the arts. And I think being creative is an essential trait for all of us in all the disciplines, all the time. And when we choose not to be creative is when we give up. It's when we become stuck in things. And so put the contrary to not being creative. Why would one become creative? And that's the shopping list in my mind. I'm not going to read it to you. It's there. If anyone's interested in this PowerPoint, I'm happy to share it out. But I think fundamentally, being creative is a mindset. It's something you wake up with. You believe it is possible. You have a process for doing it. It does support a different way of thinking. You can attempt to solve problems, and I would almost guarantee you'll get the same solutions. It's Einstein's view of insanity, right? Doing the same thing, expecting a different outcome. But you could wake up and choose to engage in problem finding. And I think that's where we are. Both, I've lived a long time in rural, small British Columbia, and I think the same things are facing Atlantic Canada. Economic diversity, what are we going to be, lifestyle choices, how we choose to live in the world. Those are problem-finding endeavors. Those aren't problem-solving. Problem-solving is short cycle, and that's kind of the problem of our medicine and a lot of other things. We solve symptoms, we don't look for the actual problems. So the exciting thing to me is the fact that in creativity, we actually look to problem find. We actually look to tear apart, be divergent, to put everything on the table and think differently by using an innovative process. I do believe weapons of mass destruction, creativity, weapons of mass creation. We can engage in this in thoughtful and considered ways. And what we have to realize is that tied intricately with creativity is curiosity and imagination. And I think the day we give up being curious, we might as well just quit. You know, like being curious is everything. Being curious is what is going to come out of that wonderful bunch of wooden strings. I mean, amazing things come out. Amazing things come out of anything. And so creativity and curiosity and innovation and imagination are all wonderful catchwords, but they actually mean something. And so, in my view, curiosity is the recognition, the pursuit, the intense desire to explore, to be novel, to be challenging, to deal with uncertainty. And so you look at some of the most creative people. Einstein didn't invent physics. He just used it really, really well and differently. People, you know, like Martha Graham, who get held up as the most, you know, amazing dancer. They didn't invent dance. They just invented cool ways of dancing. And so when you go back to the Einstein quote, imagination is more important than knowledge, you could stop there. But you really need to dig into what was he saying in that quote. And he said the rest of that quote is, for knowledge is limited basically to what we know, and imagination is the rest. It's the stimulating progress. And so we have to be very careful. We quote these lovely things, we put them on coffee cups, you know, imagination is more important than knowledge. Really? You know, like I wanted that pilot who flew me here to be pretty knowledgeable, not so much imaginative, right? But adapting with the weather change, yes, I'd like him to do that as well. And so imagination, curiosity, all those things require expertise. They require expertise in a domain. They require mastery in a field. You know, you can really become more creative and more imaginative the more you know. So the more you know, the more you will know. And, you know, one of the things in getting to live this long and work with a lot of students over time and a lot of people in various situations, the majority of people are stymied in imagination and curiosity because they don't even know what they don't know. They don't know the questions to ask. And I think that's where the role of creativity and the introduction of processes to help us deal with that is critically important. And so I think, you know, part of this is curiosity is very much underestimated. It's emphasized. And yet we know from literature, and you know, literature, whatever that is, a whole bunch of people writing things, we know that curiosity is one of the strongest markers of success. That at the end of the day, you can take IQ tests, you can take all kinds of things, you can take previous marks, you can take whatever kind of indicators you want. But at UBC, we're beginning to consider what would it be to do holistic admissions. And if we did holistic admissions, what would be the holistic indicator? Is that me? Oh, no. And so one of the biggest indicators we really think is curiosity. What have you done? What have you been curious in? What has interested you since you were young? Did you take apart, you know, the first toilet seat you ever saw? Did you take this, you know, did you open all the drawers? Did you probe things? And so this takes us to, and I'm not going to use my time to bash schools about all the things they're not doing, but schools that are doing things right, and classrooms that are doing things right, and learning environments that are doing things right, really do those 3 points right there. They have a novel factor. They surprise students. There is a complexity to them that isn't ordinary. There is autonomy and choice, and that's one of the biggest gifts of blended learning, is if we chose to maximize it, is that opportunity. They encourage questioning and questions, and more important, questioning assumptions about how we think things should work, which allows us to see them in different ways. And so how do we do that? We do that by exposing people to very different experiences and circumstances. And I would argue it very rarely happens in spaces that look ironically like this. This is good for what it's doing right now. It brought us together. It allows us to say a common message. But what's going to happen over the next 2 days, and probably what's going to happen this evening, and all the informal conversations in between, is even more important. And so we can't privilege this space over those spaces. And so this is why learning and creativity and imagination happen lifelong, life-wise. They happen in unexpected things with unexpected people you meet. And they start by fostering a passion for what you might be curious in. And I think that's the thing that scares me the most, is classrooms that I've been privileged to go into where the passion has been put aside. Save it for later. Passion has been put aside for make-a clubs after school. Passion has been put aside for genius hour, because you have to say to yourself, then what, the rest of the hours are stupid hours? You know, like, I'm not against genius hour, please, and people have tweeted that I am, but I'm not. I'm just saying be careful in your language, because if you have genius hour, you got 23 other ones. Just saying. Okay, so I think one of the things that's really important is, how do we foster these cognitive connections? How do you deal with this? How do you foster curiosity? And then, of course, it brings you to this wonderful cartoon. You can't have a day without a Gary Larson cartoon. But, you know, curiosity, yep, curiosity killed those cats. Well, that's not what we're up to. We're not up to that, because I think actually we have an option. And design thinking actually enlivens curiosity. It breathes life into curiosity. And so what I want to share with you is 3 stories that I've been privileged over the last gazillion years to kind of hone, and they're amalgams of stories in which design thinking has played an integral role in the fostering of creativity and the offering of a process by which one can continuously be creative, continuously think divergently, be encouraged to take those risks. Because, you know, just like I said, and I keep promising myself I'll never bring up genius hour again, because I always get in trouble for that. But my reason for that is creativity isn't a temporal period. So the minute you say something is an hour, or it's this or it's that, I understand you have to put things aside to make sure they happen. But I think we have to be very precise in our language that they don't happen in a time. They happen over time. And as Thomas Edison says, being persistent is the gift. Anybody can be clever for a couple seconds, but being persistent over time is the real gift. And that's one of the things in a very jumbled curriculum that we have, K to 20, and a very jumbled life that we have with the infusion of technologies. Do we give ourselves the gift of time to think well and be creative and think in a process system way? And it's one of the reasons I'm very passionate on design thinking. So here are 2 resources, and I don't mean just to flaunt my own work, because there's a zillion people way smarter and far more clever than I am. But this site is kind of an amalgam. It's making into the classrooms. It was a toolkit that we developed to foster design thinking, innovation, and making in British Columbia and Alberta. It's open access, open source. Please download it. And British Columbia, the Open School, has just written a very short little course that's a free open course, and I'm happy to share the links with you on that, that would certify, give people a badge, you know, for running through the course and seeing what this is about. Because I think we talk making, we want to bring making in, we want to bring hands-on learning in, it's all those important things. But we can't just throw it in and hope that a makerspace is going to make people more creative and imaginative and more thoughtful. We actually need to put, in my opinion, design thinking in a design process, part of it, so it's purposeful. And so this is kind of my argument, if you will, for positioning design within making. In British Columbia, in our new Applied Design Skills and Technologies curriculum that I got to help write, which I'm thrilled about, we actually said making and design builds on students' natural curiosity, inventiveness, and desire to create and work in practical ways. And by practical ways, we didn't mean, oh, practical like let's make a paperclip, but practical ways as in tangible ways, using tangible applied skills. We have to take a pause and say, is this maker stuff all brand new? Is it all part of, just new movement to create maker spaces and foster innovation and, bring economic vitality to the people who don't seem to have it? And I would say, yeah, it's so new that if we get on with it by next year, we will be only 100 years from when John Dewey asked us to do it in his call for experiential hands-on learning. So if you're feeling like you're in a big rush, I would say your only rush is to do it within 100 years of Dewey wanting us to do it. There's a lot of things about making and about the hands-on approach and allowing us to transform the experience rather than merely consume. And I think these things are highly important right now, particularly in countering folks like Prinsky's argument that, kids today are all these digital natives and they're doing all this amazing stuff. I think they're amazing in their consumption of digital stuff. I think it's time for us old hippies to invite them to actually make some stuff. And that's my passion in this, is consumption is one thing, and consuming things is one thing, but actually the production and the thinking and the development of it, the ability to turn things upside down and rethink things, the imagination required to see things differently, to design and then design again, to be willing to iterate and continue, that is the gift we need to bring to students. It's the stuff of flow and that guy with a name you can't possibly pronounce, and you're not going to get me to pronounce it at who knows what time it is in British Columbia. But it's what brings that all together. And so I think we have to look at it is, and I just fell across this in a wonderful feed a couple days ago, it's the buzzing, blooming chaos. That's what we want to invite kids into. We don't want to invite them into that passive, consumptive, da-da-da-da-da. I ride the bus every morning to work, and I look at people just, Instagramming, and I think, oh, gosh, that's what you want to do with all of this technology? Really? So it's that invitation that there is a gift and an excitement and a thrill in what most of us call creative chaos. That ability to joyfully engage in things that are worth engaging in and to go places that you don't even know existed, let alone how to get there. And so, there is some negative stuff out there, of course, and that is, the frightening thing that kids are coming to school with no small fine motor skills. Now that's scary. That is scary. Right? That they can't cut, they can't hold a pencil. And if any of you have been in undergrad courses recently and watched how people even just hold pencils, it's like, whoa, what happened? How did we all become, and what is that going to do for ergonomics and all these things down the road? But it is absolutely stunning to take a pause and say, as dexterous human beings, what's one of our biggest gifts we were given? And it's opposable thumbs and fine motor skills. And when we stop using them, what have we done? So, this article and this citation was about little kids. But my first story that I want to share with you is actually about big kids. And how did I passionately get into making and design? Well, because I always did. And I was a studio potter, and that's what I want to go back to in retirement, and blah, blah, blah. But imagine 2008, 2009, wrote a very first STEM grant at the University of Calgary and thought it would be very clever to invite first and second year engineering students to work with grade 5, 6s and kind of do some inventions, and particularly inventions situated in challenging contexts, inventing appropriate technologies. And so we had a professor there who was head of Light Up the World, who was doing solar batteries in Nepal and blah, blah, blah. So we brought these engineering students in to work with the grade 5, 6s. This is first, second year engineering. Have I said that enough? they went to work with the grade 5, 6s in teams. It was a brilliant project. It was so fun. We had such a good time. Imagine my surprise. None of them knew how to use hand tools. None. We involved about 30 first, second year engineering students. Didn't know how to measure, hadn't used hand tools, didn't know how to cut, didn't know how to glue, didn't know how to paste. This is me, my little hand right there, helping an engineer figure out how to use a jigsaw. It took my breath away on many levels, having, being an old hippie who built a house in the Kootenays with my husband who actually built it, but I like to, think I was involved. We actually knew how to use tools, and we actually knew how to do these things. And what we didn't know, we knew how to fake those things, and we learned them. But imagine a generation of engineers coming to the university who've never worked in 3 dimensions, tangibly worked in 3 dimensions. But don't worry, in 4 years they'll be building your bridges. Oh my, was that worrisome? What a fascinating project. Who did I spend all my time with? The grade 5, 6s were great. They were off doing their thing. They were no problem. Year 1, Year 2 engineering students, mentioning them again, were so open and so fascinated and thought what a great idea it was to have a sketchbook. Wow, what an amazing thing. So we worked through, at that stage, a very early iteration of design thinking. And I wish I'd known at that stage Stanford's gorgeous work coming out of D School on design thinking. But we were sort of making it up as we were going along, and I suppose we were engaging in our own version of design thinking, inventing design thinking. But what we came up with, and what's actually well supported in the literature too, is there actually are 4 stages to creative insights. And someone this morning said, being creative, I think it was you, being creative isn't just sitting alone in your room, tugging your forelock and waiting for the grand vision. God knows we've all tried that and that didn't work. But, being creative is hard work. And bringing creativity and creative ideas and innovations and good thinking to others and actualizing and actually doing something with it is a process. It's an actual process one can learn. It's a process one can have faith with. It is not a process that hijacks creativity. It's actually a process that creates the soil, creates the conditions for creativity. And so those 4 things kind of come with preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification. And so those are 4 stages of control on that process. And the biggest mistake people do, I think, and I've certainly done it, so I can speak well on the topic of mistakes, is to do one step and go, well, that didn't work, and throw it away and come up with something else. And it goes back to the Edison thing about persistence. It's seeing things through to their natural consequences, or even better yet, seeing them through to their unnatural consequences, to see them through to where they might go. And so that takes me to one of the biggest gifts. I grew up in Southern California, and we always hated Stanford because it was the private rich people's school. Now I'm in love with them. So there's irony. D School's contribution to the world of design is so substantial, and they've offered a beautiful open process. The materials are shared. I just think they've led the field. Of course, they're sitting in Silicon Valley, and why wouldn't they? But the point is, if you go back to the previous slide, which is early work on the 4 steps here, and you lay it in to Stanford's 5 steps, is it prettier? Is it more organized? Is it whatever? I don't know. It's just something that sticks with me. And I love this diagram because you'll notice these little arrows are going all over the place. And I think the biggest mistake is to believe that design thinking is a linear thing, and then you think, I've empathized, so my work is done here. Now I can just go on to ideas. I wish it were so simple. You're going to iterate and you're going to go all over, but you're going to trust the process, that all the steps are essential, and there is no shortcut to good ideas. And so the end of that first story we all lived happily ever after. The grade 5, 6s now are probably, running their own businesses. The engineering students, who knows what they're doing. They do know how to cut. They knew how to use simple hand tools. They had smiles on their faces. And that was kind of the pre-stages or the early stages to universities really beginning to talk in the 2007, 2008 about experiential learning, which is a cornerstone now of UBC Okanagan, that it's one thing to be theory, it's another to apply. And those two need to be perfectly harmonized, not this or that. Applied doesn't happen in the college, and we only think hard in the university. We actually can think hard about applying things for the common good. And this takes me to my second story, which actually leads to 2013. And in 2013, I was asked by Skills ITA, which is the Industry Training Authority in British Columbia. And Industry Training Authority are the guys who certify every Red Seal trades job in British Columbia, basically. And I think they probably do in the rest of Canada, but they certainly do in British Columbia. So you can't be a cook or a hairdresser or blah, blah, blah without going through ITA certification. And so ITA somehow connected with me, and they asked the question, we have a shortfall of skilled laborers projected in Canada, substantially. And they said, where are the skilled laborers going to come from? And I know nothing about skilled laborers. I know nothing about, I've not worked in the trades. I've always been in K-12 schools or post-secondary. And without missing a beat, I said, I know exactly where your skilled laborers are. I know exactly where they are. They're sitting in kindergarten, and they're waiting for us. They're waiting to be invited into this work. They're waiting for us to invite them to think differently and to engage. Well, ITA, whether they're crazy or not, said, okay, well, we'll fund that. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, what did they just fund? But in 2013, we put on the first Maker Day, which is the basis for the Taking Making into Schools toolkit. And we invited people, educators, because we said, one of the things we have to be very respectful to teachers about is we can't expect them to give something they don't have. So if you don't have the gift of design thinking, if you're not a maker, if you're not those things, how do you give that to the children in your care? How do you give that to someone else? You have to give what you have and be authentic about it. So the question was, could we do an immersive professional development for educators in which we introduce them to the design thinking process, making, prototyping, fabricating, the entire 5-step Stanford process? And could we do it in a day? And the answer was, sure we could, as long as we didn't invite the shop teachers to come, because they would just do the work for people. Anybody but shop can come to these Maker Day events, and we'll just do this, K to 9. Well, that was 2013, and I've had the pleasure globally now of working with over 5,000 educators. And in every instance, people have suspended disbelief. They have jumped in and embraced from the design challenge straight through. So what you're seeing here is an image of people running through Stanford's design thinking process, which is totally downloadable or accessible, engaging in empathetic, deep, human-centered conversations about how you're going to make something and then how you're going to make that thing better. They've engaged in prototyping and getting their hands dirty, working with duct tape and tape, fooling around with tools, fooling around with materials, engaging in 3D printers, doing all kinds of stuff that, when they arrived at 9 o'clock in the morning, they thought they were just going to sit for a PD. Now they've got, glue on their fingers, and they're having a great time with glue guns, and they're carrying on. And most importantly, they're realizing that there is a joyfulness, an overwhelming joyfulness that comes from creating, from making, from thinking hard, from thinking about things that matter, and literally, and let's take a riff on the word, making a difference. thinking about how they might make a difference in their world. And so now we're starting to see, we heard STEM, and then they throw more letters in, so now it's STEAM, and then it's STEM X, and then what is it going to be? An alphabet soup of all the things, which really is, back in my day, going to school in California in the 60s, was integrated thinking and interdisciplinary learning. But now people are saying, what about heat? What about heat? Isn't it about infusing and not privileging one discipline over another, but bringing the humanities to bear, bringing engineering to bear, bringing art to bear, and using appropriate technologies to do the things that matter? So that takes me to my third story. If you're getting worn out, I'm sorry, but I have 12 minutes, so I've got this third story that I want to share. And it's probably the most exciting work I've ever gotten to do, and the most humbling. And in 2008, University of Calgary, got to work with Aga Khan University. And it was around how might we collaborate together and work to use Indigenous ways of knowing and thinking to bring student-centered learning, to actually change education in East Africa from the tyranny of rote learning. And if you can imagine 40 degrees of heat, I don't think right now we could, but 40 degrees of heat, classrooms with no windows, the whole thing, you've seen it all. And kids sitting there with a blackboard they can hardly see, copying in a book, and wondering why the success rates aren't great. And it's amazing the kids even stay. But anyway, our idea was, could we begin to introduce children to active learning? And then, what do you be active with in an environment that really has nothing except the resources outside, except the environment? And so it's really interesting, and one of the things I love about working with people for whom English is not the first language, they think so thoughtfully about the words they use, and the words are very precious. And so as one of the teachers said, what I love about what we're able to do together, we are now teaching under an excited air. And when you think about it, isn't that what we want for students? Is to be in an excited air where anything is possible and everything is probable and things actually matter and learning is deep and rich. And so with humility and with a lot of collaboration from teachers, and last summer we were at the edge of northern Uganda, right at the epicenter where the Congo and South Sudan meets in a place called Arua, and fine-tuning this toolkit. And this is the place where the South Sudanese refugees are. It's like 1 million people. It's just breathtaking. And these teachers do believe that they can begin to teach under an excited air. And they do believe that the children of East Africa have got to embrace design thinking, because you cannot have things stay the way they are. So when you have people saying that, and you come home and your own colleagues say, I think this design thinking's overrated, you just want to whack them, because, excuse me, the rest of the world is on this, so do you really want to sleep through this one? So this toolkit is available too. It's all open source. It's through Issues. You can download it and mail it in multiple ways, and really would encourage this to happen. And one of the most exciting things, Cove Ocean in Nova Scotia is looking at working collaboratively to make this toolkit as a marine coast to coast to coast, because it's not as though we don't have problems here. Just threw this picture in because it was just charming. It lets you know you're not at home when that's your window view. So here we are, East Africa, and we're taking on the issue of, could you introduce design thinking? And the answer is, look at those people, talk about engaged. When you invite people to think differently, when you present a challenge, not a problem, when you open the conversation and say, this isn't about, oh my God, the problem of this and we've got to fix it. It's about what actually might the problem be, how might we go about it. You change the discourse in substantially amazing ways. And this is where I would argue again and again and again that design thinking is an invitation and a roadmap and a process to hold that excitement of that conversation and consider things through a different lens. It invites a whole different set of ideas and possibilities. It encourages people to do things. Now, this is when you realize you're not at home anymore, when you realize folks there, of course, haven't made paper airplanes. And if you want to talk about aerodynamics and you're wanting to talk about some of the basic things of science and all this stuff, one of the first things we do a lot of, or I grew up doing, was paper airplanes and throwing them paper airplane challenges. So imagine taking a group of real adults, practicing teachers who have only taught in a lecture scenario and say, why wouldn't you teach form and function, shape, aerodynamics, physics, velocity? Why wouldn't you teach aerodynamics with a paper airplane? The look is a little incredulous. And so out we went to throw paper airplanes. And I have to say, it changed everything. It changed the notion of possibilities. And I think that's what creativity's biggest gift is it changes the outcome, it changes the possibilities, it changes everything. And literally the genie is out of the bottle at that point. Anything is possible. And so things like, a solar oven made out of cardboard box is highly possible. And what do you have to know about a solar oven? What do you have to know about solar? You have to know about angle. You have to know about, there's people in this room far smarter than I. And you have to know about so many things. And you don't have to teach them in a linear way. You teach them in a just-in-time sort of way. And isn't that what we want? Not just in case learning. Just in case. I remember learning French in Southern California because just in case you met that French person. Well, what were the chances in Los Angeles of meeting somebody speaking French when everyone else is speaking Spanish? Talk about craziness. But the point is, just-in-time learning ties beautifully with design thinking and these things. And so at the end, and every workshop we've done with educators, and every time we've invited people, and like I said now, it's been a privilege to work with over 5,000 educators. Everybody has come up with a better idea, an innovative idea, an exciting idea of different resources, different projects, different things. They have designed things, and then they've designed those things better with the idea that they could make a difference in their world. And so I think the biggest lesson I would leave you today, and as we start this, and looking at the agenda for these next 2 days is just breathtakingly exciting, all the folks who are here, is the remembrance that creativity isn't just something that happens, that it is truly a process. And it's a process that engages and involves a hard work, divergent lateral thinking. It is, and design thinking, is it the silver bullet that's going to make you a better human being? I doubt it. But it is a thing. It is a gift that is there to take. And if it works for you, I do believe it will help make us all creative. I think the parting piece that I would say, and as I'm finishing this talk and as I'm actually kind of winding up my career, it's that our learning environments have to do more than just invite people to be creative and give the definitive lecture on being creative. And it's like the definitive lecture on inquiry. I mean, just on its head, it's kind of crazy. But we actually have to do much more. And we must signal and support and enable creativity. We have to create the environment, the garden, the ground by which not only do we ask for it, not only do we say it should happen, but we create the spaces for it to happen. And so one of the things that I am just delighted with that I've been able to do, and that I'm kind of leaving at UBC Okanagan, is a makerspace. And wouldn't you know, it's just unbelievable. It's probably the nicest room in the entire campus. It overlooks this pond. It looks out over to, the valley and the vineyards and da-da-da. It's just gorgeous. I may never leave. But the point is, it is a space, and it's just getting set up, and it's an interdisciplinary space, and we've cast it as a space for students, staff, and faculty to come together and imagine the future, to come together and play at any time, any place. It has everything from crayons that you can color on the desk, dry crayons, to 3D printers and CNC machines. Why? Because it's a space that we want people to come together and play and make and think hard in. And so the negative thing I want to say, and I like I said, I didn't want to come here today and say all the things we're doing wrong, because I think many of us, and probably all of us in this room, are just giving our heart and soul to doing things right. But I think we have to remember there are killers to creativity. And one of the biggest ones is surveillance, watching closely. The second is evaluation. I want you to take a great deal of risk, and then I'll grade that risk, right? I want you to take a great deal of risk, but it has to be done in a 2-week period, and then I'll grade it. Another killer of creativity is rewards. Your imagination is better than yours. What are we saying with that? That's just crazy making. Competition is a killer. We've had the privilege of working with Skills Canada. Skills Canada has always cast their work in skills competitions until last year. And we got to go do one in Edmonton that was a skills exploration. And let me tell you, the hardest thing was changing the language and not giving prizes. Let's just come together and do stuff and not have a prize. And we'll all be creative, and we'll all leave, and we'll all have explored skills. A couple other things I want to say. Over control, controlling the experience. I think we have to trust the process. Create the opportunities, give the things, trust it. Pressure and time. So I guess my parting comments on here is I do believe that making, design thinking, can foster creativity, imagination, and those things, and innovation, by fostering pleasure, not pressure, and inviting people to take true leaps of faith. And it takes us back to this process, and trusting a process that no matter how messy it looks and how confusing it feels, we'll get there, and there'll be something at the end. And if it's duct taped and sort of falling over and a little oddly looked and doesn't quite look like the parent science fair project, please don't tweet that, but that it actually looks more like a project that's, done by kids, it's fine, because this is all part of the process. Oh, there's my time. And if you haven't run across this book, this is the last thing. I wish I'd written this book. I would encourage you to look at the folks at MIT. Mitch Resnick, Seymour Papert's old lab, the guy who invented Logo, Lifelong Kindergarten. And the argument that creativity is fostered really through these 4 things: projects, passion, peers, and play. And I just thank you for including me in this conference, for letting me come to Atlantic Canada. How exciting for 2 days, I can hardly wait. And for being part of this wonderful array of presentations and opportunities that we're going to have here. So at that, I don't know if there's time for questions, but I'm going to be here, so I just invite you to engage me in conversation. So I don't know where we are, what we should do.
We have time probably for just maybe 1 or 2 questions.
That'd be awesome. Questions are always good.
Thank you so much. It was so interesting. I'm a college teacher, and I was wondering, making these workshops and things like that to give them points, because like you said, I don't want to judge their creativity. So how, do you have any tips on evaluation?
You know, isn't that the elephant in the room?
I know.
And I mean, you know, working in East Africa, I know what the elephant in the room looks like. Now, there's no room and the elephant isn't in there. But darned if evaluation and assessment doesn't suck the soul out of so much, isn't it? You know, I do believe you can evaluate it. And what is the it? And I think it's our task to, are we talking process or are we talking product? Now there's my cosmic answer. I think we want to evaluate process. I think we want to see the steps. I think we want to encourage wrestling with that. I think we can put it in a rubric, we can express it in many ways, da 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 da. And then I think we have to assess product in a very different way as well. I think sometimes we conflate the two, and we also conflate in the innovation and creativity side process and product, and think process just gets you to product, and so we're only going to. So I guess one of the things, without knowing anything about your context and getting to fly home as soon as I say this on Sunday, but I would say, I think if we're really honestly in Canada, and I think this is a Canada issue, around fostering advanced manufacturing, a skilled workforce, being the masters of our own destiny in a time where we're in transition of who we are, I think we have to evaluate process and leave product alone. I think we suck the goodness out of creativity, imagination, and whatever by looking only at product. And I would say, looking on the journey of my educational experience, I probably more often than not have been evaluated on product. And I look, even those of us who teach graduate school, we let people talk about process in Chapter 3 methodology, and then we just critique the heck out of the rest of it, which is the product. So that would be my two-bit answer. Thanks. Thanks for a great question.
I think we'll have to probably stop this in terms of time, but thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Just a small token of our appreciation for a fabulous first keynote today. And I think the thing that a tremendous takeaway is that fostering of creativity and thinking outside the box and really allowing people to learn in many different ways and using their hands as well as their minds to discover and find and build new ideas. I think it's just so important for us to think about as we continue to use our hands more and more for doing this. I'm very worried about that. So the idea of using our hands and making things again and teaching people that they have all those capacities is absolutely important and something that we need to think about as educators. So thank you again, Suze, for a wonderful keynote.
Oh,